particular spice do I need to make this recipe work? So I think about food all day when I'm on a job and also when I go home because I have to struggle to get my kids to eat their veggies. Well, that's the way it is. But this isn't really what my job is about. Why do I go around the world worrying about food? I have to think about what are we going to do so that everyone in the world gets to eat enough food of the right kind so that they have healthy and productive lives. It just isn't as easy as opening a cookbook and following the recipe. You mess up, you burn the rice, that's it. But you mess up your agricultural development strategy and people could really go hungry in a major way. So what is the successful development? Looking for this brought me to Bangladesh in 1996, more than 14 years ago. In 1995, about 51% of the population lived below the poverty line. Bangladesh has made tremendous progress in reducing poverty over the last 10 years. The percentage of people in poverty have gone down from 50% to 40%. But still, more than 50 million people live in extreme poverty and don't have enough of the right food to eat each day. So I go to Bangladesh and I ask, okay, so what are people eating? Well, they're eating lots of rice. Lots and lots and lots of rice. What's wrong with that? I'm Filipino. I eat rice every day. I couldn't quarrel with eating lots of rice every day. Well, there are two things wrong with this picture. First, most protein is coming from rice, and not so much out of fish, meat, and pulses. So this means that diets are not very diverse. People, especially women and children, are not getting enough micronutrients that they need for health. And so we need to do something about the composition of this diet. The second thing that's wrong with this plate is that it's the average plate. If this is the average plate, what a woman would get would be much smaller than the average plate, because if you're going to go to a typical household, what happens first is that the mother feeds the working male adults, feeds the children, and takes the last for herself. So oftentimes, very, very little is left for the mother to eat. Now, what's wrong with that? The thing is, women and children really need micronutrients more. And there is a very strong link between gender disparities and malnutrition in Bangladesh. Women and children are vulnerable to micronutrient deficiencies because they have greater biological needs. And there also is a pro-male bias in food distribution. In South Asia, women's status is much lower relative to men's, and this contributes to the poor nutritional status of children and their mothers. If a woman is not well nourished, she cannot take care of children, and she cannot take care of herself either. So trying to look for the recipe to change all this, people started thinking, what if we have foods which are rich in micronutrients and we encourage people to grow them? It could lower the price of these foods for the general population, as well as improve the incomes of the people who are producing them. So I went to Bangladesh and I visited the sites of 3 agricultural interventions. I went there first in 1996 and then went back 10 years later. So there were 3 interventions. The first one was a fish pond technology where you grew 7 species of fish in a fish pond. And in this first site that I went to, this was disseminated by the implementing organization to households. The second site had the same fish pond technology, which was being disseminated by an NGO to poor women's groups. And in the third site, improved seeds were being disseminated by the NGO through poor women's groups. So let's take a quick tour. These are my pictures which I took in the field ages ago. So some of them are not of great quality, but you can see what it was like. So in the individual fish pond site, the ponds are actually located at the back of your house, so you need to have land to be able to build a pond. Households, meaning mostly the husbands, were taught how to grow different kinds of fish in their backyards. Poor households got credit, while richer farmers obtained only training. Women were required to be 30% of the beneficiaries of these projects, but they actually benefited only in name. Because women are not encouraged to travel far outside their homesteads, It was actually their husbands who cultivated the fish and who brought them to the market and, of course, who sold the fish. What the women basically did was to feed the fish every day. Okay, 10 years later, fish pond production is booming. Those teeny tiny fish ponds where they're as big as swimming pools now, they are really huge. Fish is like black gold. Per capita expenditures of fish adopters have increased. Their asset holdings have increased. Our dietary data show us that consumption of calories, protein, iron, vitamin A have all increased. But because the technology was targeted only to men, men actually still control the bulk of assets in the household. They make most of the decisions. And in fact, their control of household resources has increased compared to their wives. And the funny thing is, although incomes have gone through the roof and assets have increased, children's nutritional status has not improved that much. Improvements of stunting rates of girls has actually been quite low. And so you wonder, where has all that money gone? We go to this other site, a group fish pond site. Now, in this site, the families were quite poor. They didn't have land. So what the NGO did was organize long-term land leases for women's groups so they could excavate a pond and farm the pond jointly. Now, most women in this area are poor and illiterate, so the NGO actually came up with a very novel way of teaching them how to cultivate the fish. So they drew pictures of the fish, the different kinds of fish, and then all the steps of production. And so by following that chart, you could actually learn to manage a fish pond yourself. 10 years later, women have begun buying land in their own names and having their own fish ponds. So the group has actually been quite successful. Some groups have graduated from the NGO and stopped taking loans and have become successful, but some groups also were not successful and therefore they dissolved. When we compare the income gains in this site to the income gains in the individual fish pond site, per household, the income gains were smaller because you had to divide the proceeds among so many. And nutritional improvements were not that big either. But women were able to accumulate assets much faster than men did, even though men still had more of the assets. And there was some improvement in nutritional indicators, interestingly, of boys. Now, in the last site, vegetables, improved seeds, were introduced to poor women's groups and who were taught how to grow them in their homesteads. So these little plots of land around their house. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult for women in Bangladesh to leave their homesteads to go to markets. And so instead of letting them go out of their homesteads and their comfort zones to do this new technology, the NGO brought the technology to them. The technology was cheap. It was very easy to disseminate. It did not require a lot of land. And so lots of people adopted it. And in fact, because vegetables are a low-status food, women would just give the vegetables away as little gifts. The men paid no attention to these vegetables. They weren't, classy enough. But the women liked them. They ate them. The kids ate them. So what happened 10 years later? Oh my gosh, the whole place is green. The whole place is all full of vegetables. The houses have improved. People who used to live in grass-thatched shacks now have tin roofs. The livestock look healthy. People have cows. There are tubers everywhere. And it seems to be a really prosperous place compared to 10 years ago. But interestingly enough, those who adopted these vegetables early didn't really do fantastically well compared to the later adopters. And it's because the later adopters copied from them and learned from their mistakes. Later adopters learned from early adopters, and so you have a really quite diffuse technology now. The interesting thing is that even though income gains were small, nutritional improvements were quite remarkable. The stunting rates of girls decreased, thinness rates of boys decreased, and women's body mass index and hemoglobin status improved. The women and children were eating the vegetables. So what was the missing ingredient in all this? When we went to this site last October, we found out that the real thing behind this was that NGOs had mobilized women and built social capital. They recognized the barriers that women face and worked to find solutions to these barriers. And one of these barriers really was the lack of access to credit. So if you look at this woman, she's proudly showing her passbook, which shows what loan she took from the NGO and also that she paid them back. And this is just one picture which doesn't really capture the energy that this women's group had. You know, they were very, very proud of what they did. They all brought their passbooks, they showed them to us. It was so full of energy, it's amazing. So as we were leaving this site to go back to Dhaka, a woman ran up to us showing with great pride these vegetables, which she was holding like a bouquet, and this child in her arm. And I was thinking, wow, what a nice parting image of this site. You know, this bunch of vegetables is better than a bouquet of flowers. Don't tell that to my husband. And so they had this low status food, but they were also growing healthy children. So I asked, is this only an experience of this particular NGO, or is it also happening elsewhere? So let's take a look.
I remember my mother crying. She told me I had lost the light in my eyes. They said we were not eating enough good foods.
Bangladesh, 1980s. Massive gains had been made in improving food availability, but far less had been achieved in improving the quality of food. Malnutrition from both plant-based diets lacking essential vitamins and minerals and limited access to nutrient-rich animal foods resulted in a great number of mothers suffering from night blindness, and worse, children becoming blind.
Soon I will be a mother. I must learn a new way so my child can have a future full of light.
Taking aim at this, an innovative program was begun to help people increase the quality of their diet, particularly their consumption of foods rich in vitamin A, zinc, and iron. Uniquely, it focused on home gardening, small livestock production, and teaching people about nutrition. The program has reached an estimated 5 million people. Participants' sales from garden produce doubled and contributed to improved diet quality for millions. Through homestead food production, effective changes aided the entire food chain in Bangladesh, from production to marketing and finally to the family table.
They will see a new world full of life.
So my colleagues from Millions Fed have shown that this is really not an isolated case. Taking into account the constraints that poor people face, especially poor women, has had big benefits for the diets of the whole country. But so, what do you say? But that's Bangladesh. We're not in Bangladesh. Or using my recipe analogy, what if you don't eat Bangladeshi curries? What's the missing ingredient if you're making arroz con pollo? Or you're making injera? Or you're making a simple acharat you serve with fish? It's like, can I learn from this Bangladesh case and take it to where I am right now and looking at problems of hunger and micronutrient deficiency? And so what is the secret ingredient? The secret ingredient is really paying attention to gender relations. The secret ingredient varies from place to place. It is not the same because the recipes are different. You need to look at the balance of ingredients. You need to look at what families are like. Families are very different if they're in Ethiopia, in Ecuador, in Ghana, in Bangladesh, or even in my own Philippines. In each place, you need to pay attention to how men and women relate to each other in the household, in society, in the farm. Paying attention to gender is a missing ingredient to successful development interventions. Bon appétit!